Zhu Yao found herself in a poorly written book, and the system made her cling to the villain and develop a deep love affair with him. She grinned and said, "Who can't be abused? Can't the male protagonist be abused? System. It's difficult for me to deliver like this. Zhu Yao. Who is difficult to handle the task? System. I. Zhu Yao. That's none of my business. System. Legitimate copy. Su Ling was quiet and reserved, with a pair of washed eyes fixed on Zhu Yao. After he gained the power he wanted and fell into the demon realm, his former master became a canary in his demon palace. People say that Zhu Yao cannot live without him. Only Su Ling knew in her heart that he couldn't live without Zhu Yao. He had red eyes and carefully pinched Zhu Yao's hem, with a tearful voice pleading, "Master, I only have you left. Don't leave me." Zhu Yao continued to caress the person kneeling in front of her, his eyes slightly flickering. "But Su Ling, I'm not the only one. 1v1, he keywords of the novel. I really don't want to have a deep love affair with the villain without pop-ups, I really don't want to have a deep love affair with the villain. Download the complete text, I really don't want to read the latest chapter on deep love affair with the villain." Chapter 1. 001, Masturbating Emotions and Coming. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1001. Masturbating Emotions comes in the dazzling hall. Zhu Yao sat on a rattan chair, looking somewhat bewildered at the young man kneeling below. The young man was dressed in a grey and plain robe, with bamboo branches and hair. Although kneeling in the hall, his waist was straight, and from his hair to his heels, 2 words could be seen. Dissatisfied. What was even more incomprehensible to her was that she had been in this world for 5 years, and the forgotten system suddenly froze, telling her that the villain had appeared, and it was the stunned young man with a face full of dissatisfaction in front of her. She needs to conquer him, lick him crazily, make him disgusted while getting used to her kindness, and finally, because he protects his beloved and forces her to death, to achieve the final task. Deep love and abuse. Zhu Yao took a cold breath and politely asked the system, "Are you sick?" The system ignored her mockery and said coldly, "The mission has been initiated, and the current favorability is 0. Zhu Yao felt a little unwilling and asked again in her heart, "The depth of sadistic love cannot just abuse me, can it? How can the villain abuse me?" System. After the host dies, the villain will regret it. Zhu Yao. Is that all? The system is starting to freeze. Zhu Yao felt helpless and looked at the person kneeling below again. It was not difficult to tell that he was the villain. With a handsome face like a banished immortal, and a tragic background of annihilation, carrying deep blood and sea enmity, he ascended to the Qingshu sect to learn and become a disciple, and was truly beautiful, strong, and miserable. Today is the day when he climbed the mountain. He came from afar alone to show his sincerity. He climbed 10,000 steps step by step, with his head broken and his knees worn out. He was covered in dust and disheveled, except for his bright and lively eyes, which moved the leader and brought him to the council. She held a spirit peach picked from the back mountain in her hand, facing the hateful gaze of her second senior brother, wiped it with her sleeve, took a bite, and looked back provocatively. Tell him to grit his silver teeth. All right, Zhu Yao, don't just focus on eating. What do you think of this disciple? The senior brother in charge stopped their hostile gaze and looked at Zhu Yao. Before she could speak, she saw the boy below staring at her, or perhaps the peach in her hand. She took another bite of the peach in front of the young man and said vaguely, "Senior brother, give it to me. I'll take him as my disciple." Senior brothers and sisters have a clear expression on their faces. No wonder so. Other elders take their disciples for luck, while she takes her disciples for looks. As long as she looks good, it's her. Every day when I wake up and leave, handsome men and beautiful women respectfully call her, "Good morning, master." I feel extremely good all day. The reason why the leader asked her was also because this young man had no immortal fate at all, he was just an ordinary person. But his perseverance, as well as his determination to cut his own throat if he doesn't accept him, made the always kind leader let go. To put it bluntly, it's like keeping it as a decoration, making him feel at ease and practicing almost without much thought. Zhu Yao didn't mind. She crossed her legs and asked leisurely, "What's your name? How old are you?" "Su Ling, this year's 16th. She vaguely remembered what he had said earlier, but at that time she was still immersed in the tasks informed by the system and couldn't help but concentrate and not pay attention. Looking up and down at the young man in front of me, who is only 16 years old and has a red root, why shouldn't he develop into a deep love affair? Zhu Yao suddenly thought of a question and asked the system, the final task is to have a deep sadistic relationship. Is the sadist villain considered sadistic? The system continues to stall. Zhu Yao sneered, if she didn't answer, then she would accept it. She eats, drinks, and has fun in this world. Why should she fall in love and die in this person's hands? She doesn't have any system issues. The leader explained some matters and said that he was going to cross the tribulation and close the door. He asked several elders to pay more attention, especially naming Zhu Yao. Su Ling has a weak foundation, so please think of a way. Don't run around every day or two, and if something happens, no one will wipe your butt. Zhu Yao was submissive and said, yes, yes. This appearance made the head of the sect angry and wanted to scold her. He also thought that she was shameless, and it took a lot of time to scold. He couldn't listen at all, so he sighed and didn't pay attention to her anymore. She led Su Ling out, turned into a sword, carried Su Ling to the sword, and immediately slipped away with the sword. Second senior brother chased after her and cursed at her back, "Zhu Yao, if you go to the back mountain again to pick my fruit, I'll break your leg." The sound echoed throughout the entire mountain, shaking the sky. However, the disciples of the sect were accustomed to it and did not even lift their heads. Su Ling was too fast, tightly gripping Zhu Yao's sleeve, his face turned pale with fear. When Zhu Yao landed on the top of Zhu Mountain and withdrew his sword, he stumbled. Tear and pull, a sound. Zhu Yao lowered his head and glanced at his waist, where his clothes were torn apart by Su Ling, revealing a piece of white and greasy flesh. Su Ling was quite at a loss, her hands not knowing where to put them. Her neck turned red to the back of her ears, and she lowered her head, afraid to look at her. "I'm sorry, master." Zhu Yao stroked his head with her hand, and the feigned death system immediately jumped out. Warning, do not assassinate the villain. Zhu Yao patted his head with a gentle voice and said, "I'll punish you for cleaning the palace for a week and sewing the clothes of the teacher, okay?" Without hesitation, Su Ling said, "Yes, master." She rubbed his head twice again and said, "You're so good." The system jumped out again, unable to hold its cold throat and feeling a little angry. "Host, what are you doing? This is the villain, are you training dogs?" The system said more today than it has said in recent years. Zhu Yao remembers the last time it was 5 years ago when the system just brought her into this world and asked her to wait for the villain, and then it disappeared. She casually replied to the system, "Didn't you see that? I'm abusing him to speed up my love affair." System. Sadomasochistic love, why do you think there should be love? You have no emotional foundation, how can you abuse? Zhu Yao said, "Masturbating your emotions and it's here." System. She was changing clothes inside the house when she heard a shout outside the door, saying, "Master, you're back." Just as she changed clothes, she came out holding the clothes she had taken off and threw them to Su Ling. He pulled off the clothes covering his head and held them in his arms, his face turning slightly red for some reason. The person who came was a delicate little girl. After her movements, she noticed that there was still a person standing outside the door, covered in dust and not compatible with the aura of Indian. "Master, who is this?" Qi Lian blinked her eyes and looked curiously at Su Ling. In the future, it will be your junior brother. Remember to take care of him more, Zhu Yao said with a smile. That's for sure. Qi Lian pounced into Zhu Yao's arms, smiling brightly. Master, in May, I will be an adult. Can Master accompany me on a trip to the East China Sea? Zhu Yao has always had no resistance to beautiful things, let alone Qi Lian, who is charming and adorable. No matter what she says, she cannot be refused. She remembered that Qi Lian was a member of the Shark clan, a mischievous creature who grew up in the East China Sea. Due to being too weak, she was often bullied by her peers. 4 years ago, she went to the East China Sea to attend a banquet on behalf of the leader, saw her cuteness, and brought her back. She naturally agreed to the requests made by the lovely little disciple and smiled, saying, I will definitely go. Turning his head, he saw Su Ling looking at her with a deep expression on his face, with a hint of AI in his eyes. Zhu Yao thought to herself, it's all about the system causing trouble. He's only 16 years old now and has lost his entire clan. It's better not to be too harsh. So she said, Su Ling, you will go with me then. Su Ling's expression paused, and he quickly bent down and said, I obey you. Qi Lian's expression stiffened, with a hint of displeasure on her face. Master, why did you take him with you? He just climbed the mountain, shouldn't he study hard and practice hard? This appearance really made her feel heartbroken. She quickly hugged her and touched her face to comfort her, saying, he has a weak foundation. As a teacher, I happen to go to the East China Sea to ask if there is any way to help him break through 1 or 2. This was not all instructed by the head senior brother, I have to do it. She rudely threw the pot at the master, as he was closed and couldn't hear. Pinching 2 fists of Qi Lian's baby fat, I couldn't help but feel that the appearance of the shark tribe was indeed top-notch, needing it soft. Qi Lian nodded in grievance and looked up at Su Ling. Su Ling saw the two of them holding each other, with a flash of envy in her eyes. Then it turned into calmness. Qi Lian wiped away her tears and smiled apologetically at Su Ling, saying, Junior brother, don't blame me. I have always been close to my master, and I have made you laugh. Su Ling sensed a vague rejection and was quite confused. She shook her head silently and couldn't help but take a second look at Qi Lian. He was certain that the two were meeting for the first time and didn't know why she was hostile towards him. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. 002, I'll tell you a secret. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2002. I'll tell you a secret, but soon Su Ling will know why. Zhu Yao gave a smirk and asked Qi Lian to take him to collect the attire of the sect and arrange his residence. Then, he closed the door and went back to the house to rest. Qi Lian looked at the door with a hint of longing, and then left feeling lonely. It seems like I just remembered Su Ling's existence, and was surprised to see him still standing there. I smiled and said, Junior brother, please come with me. The smile was not as sincere as when facing the master, with a hint of hypocrisy and compromise. Although Su Ling was young, she was particularly sensitive and could discern the speculations of others. After leaving the courtyard, Qi Lian finally asked him, how did you enter the sect before it was time to select disciples? And why was she under the master's command? And why did the master give her clothes to you? She stopped and met him face to face, completely devoid of the adorable appearance in front of her master just now, somewhat domineering. Su Ling, who had just arrived, didn't want to make any mistakes. He roughly explained the reason why he came to the Qingshu sect. He lowered his eyes and looked at the clothes in his arms, saying, I just came with a sword. I accidentally tore my master's clothes, and he asked me to mend them. Upon hearing this, Qi Lian felt a bit itchy in her teeth and her tone increased a bit. How dare you pull on master's clothes? How audacious. You'd better stay away from master, otherwise I'll have to skin you. Su Ling didn't understand. He stared at Xu Qilian in confusion for a long time before asking, "Senior sister likes master?" Qi Lian raised her eyebrows and said, "Is it difficult to tell?" Su Ling shook her head, "Not difficult to see, but a bit unbelievable. Women being with women or something, it's too rare." Qi Lian seemed to see his thoughts and grinned, "Junior brother, I'll tell you a secret." She waved at Su Ling. Although Su Ling noticed that she was a bit hostile, she didn't target her, probably all the people who were close to her master. With curiosity in his heart, he really leaned his head forward. Qi Lian said word by word, "I am a member of the shark race, and I can choose a gender when I reach adulthood." Su Ling looked at her in shock. Qi Lian wrapped her hands around her chest, feeling a bit proud. She raised her eyebrows at him and said, "Whatever your master likes, I will become what I am. You can't compete with me, so I advise you to put your mind back early." Did you hear me? Su Ling. I heard you. Qi Lian took him for a walk, took him to a remote courtyard for resettlement, and also had 2 senior brothers living with him. The 2 senior brothers saw Qi Lian with great respect and saw him off all the way. When they returned, they still had a smile on their faces, but when they looked at Su Ling, their smile disappeared. "Are you an outer disciple or an inner disciple?" he asked. Su Ling shook her head and Zhu Yao never said anything to him from the beginning. The senior brother patted his shoulder and said, "This is the courtyard where the outer disciples live. Since senior sister Qi Lian brought you here, it seems that it was also the master's intention. I heard that you are coming from the master, and I thought it would be an inner sect, but it's not a big problem. The master is very kind and won't treat anyone unfairly." The outer door. Su Ling murmured softly. For several days in a row, Zhu Yao often saw the figure of Su Ling wiping various places in the Inn Palace without any intention of complaining. Even the clothes he had originally been asked to sew on were repaired by him the next day. He washed them and folded his hands, presenting them with a touch of flattery, even though the skilled dog shook its head when it saw them. Every time Su Ling looked at her, his gaze shone brightly, like a small dog seeing its owner. He could vaguely see his long tail wagging happily behind his buttocks, making Zhu Yao have to doubt it. In his heart, he asked the system to himself, "Are you sure he is really the big villain who ruthlessly destroyed the Qingshu sect with cold blood in the future and personally wielded his mentor's sword?" The system's brain was overloaded and crashed a few days ago. When she returned, she told her that it was from a poorly written and unfinished novel by Chuan Chuan. The author is a cute and new writer with poor writing and plot, and the antagonists cannot be established. Without emotional support, the black transformation has become a machine that only knows how to kill people, with unpredictable emotions. The dog author later realized that he couldn't control the plot at all, so he decided to let himself go and let the villain develop, not to mention annihilating the entire Qingshu sect and killing his mentor. When he went crazy, both the male and female protagonists were stabbed. While cursing the villain for being ruthless, the reader comforts himself. Either way, double death is also possible. Zhu Yao was amazed to hear it. After a moment of silence, the system said, "The most serious collapse of this book is the villain. You need to strengthen this emotional bond and make the villain a flesh and blood person." Zhu Yao said, "Sacrificing myself for this. Do you want to hear what you're saying? Are you crazy or am I crazy? You are a reader, this is your task." The system's voice was very tough. Zhu Yao rolled her eyes and said, "It's not what I want to wear. I was wondering, what book should I wear when I sleep? Everyone else is dying before giving them a chance to be reborn. You threaten them to complete the task under the pretext of rebirth. I'm alive, you brought it to me, but I haven't even accounted for it yet. What's going on? I'm alive, affecting your performance. Do you have to kill me?" The system was a bit less confident when she said it too much, and her voice was not as tough as before. "You slept too soundly, and I judged that you were dead." "Who knew you weren't dead?" she said. Zhu Yao. "Is it my fault for sleeping so well?" Don't mess with this, anyway, this book has also collapsed. Can't we just train the villains into the for good youth system? It's not easy for me to handle tasks like this. Zhu Yao. Who's not good at handing over assignments? System. Zhu Yao. That's it, it's none of my business. The system was cursing profusely, but it seemed to be blocked. She could only hear a cold mechanical sound that said, beep 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 beep. She automatically ignored and smiled softly at Su Ling, asking, "Are you tired, Su Ling?" Su Ling was cleaning the floor and needed to look up at her, shake her head. "I'm not tired." Zhu Yao stepped forward and helped him up. "You don't need to clean anymore. Master said that day, just to make you familiar with this place. Master is well-intentioned, and disciples will remember him in their hearts." Su Ling showed great respect and was impeccable. Zhu Yao pondered for a moment and said, "From now on, you can follow me as your teacher. I will think of ways to refine your muscles and bones for you." Su Ling's eyes lit up, shining brightly as she stared at her, more like a dog. "Thank you, Master, disciple. To be honest with you, your bones are not strong enough. It's even more difficult to cultivate than an ordinary disciple. If you can't bear the hardships, go down the mountain as soon as possible," Zhu Yao said, smacking her tongue. Su Ling hurriedly said, "I can endure hardship. Master, don't drive me away." Zhu Yao's eyes were filled with a smile, with a hint of cunning. "That's just right. I have a training task for you, Master." Su Ling obediently said to her, "Master, please speak up." Zhu Yao. "Do you remember where the back mountain is? Avoid the sight of the second elder and pick a peach to come back." Su Ling, ah. His originally eager face turned into doubt upon hearing the task. Zhu Yao. "Ah, what? This is exercising you. Are you going or not?" "Go." Zhu Yao touched his head, and Su Ling lowered her head, blushing in her ears. Children are easy to deceive. She watched Su Ling leave all the way and remembered something in her heart. She asked the system, "Has his liking for me changed?" The system was still unhappy about what happened earlier and coldly replied, "No." Zhu Yao touched her chin and said, "It shouldn't be. Am I not good to him?" The system is not speaking. When Su Ling returned, she felt a bit embarrassed. Her good Taoist robe was torn out a few times, and there was a thin red mark on her face. She held a peach in her hands and was pinned to the ground by the second elder. Second elder Yan Qingrui is a tough person. He gets impatient with her shameless and skinny personality on weekdays, and today his face is full of anger. If he doesn't calm her down properly, he's afraid he'll tear down the entire palace. Zhu Yao pointed her throat with a smile and said, "Senior brother, why did you get so angry? Didn't you just pick a peach?" As for arguing with a new disciple, Yan Qingrui said coldly, "You know he's just a new disciple, and you even asked him to steal peaches from my place." Upon hearing him say this, Zhu Yao also became enthusiastic and smiled, saying, "Today you ran into him and used a few moves to capture him." Yan Qingrui said, "I haven't really touched him. I won't use any techniques, but rely on physical techniques. With just one move, I can take him down." Zhu Yao smiled brightly and said, "That's not necessarily the case in the future. Once you're born, twice you're ripe." Yan Qingrui quickly understood and spoke more harshly, "This is the disciple you have taken in. Do you want me to accompany you in training?" Zhu Yao always smiled, flattering and reaching out not to hit the smiling person. "We are all disciples of the sect. Don't say this to hurt our harmony, otherwise the head senior brother will find out and be unhappy." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. 003, Do you like Su Ling? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3003. Do you like Su Ling? Everyone knows that the senior brother in charge values harmony the most and strictly prohibits internal conflicts within the sect. Only by moving him out can we hold on to the second elder. In terms of speech, he couldn't say anything about Zhu Yao, so he had to put down a harsh sentence. If the upper beam is not straight and the lower beam is crooked, if you call him again, I will still fight. You remember, you got beaten because of her. Zhu Yao shouted at his back, "Hey, hello, moral kidnapping, you." Yan Qingrui walked away without looking back, and Zhu Yao let out a tsk and sighed. Su Ling knelt down and took 2 steps forward, looking at her with a washed gaze. She handed the peach she was protecting with both hands. It was a big one, both red and beautiful in shape, carefully selected at first glance. Zhu Yao didn't take it and looked at him strangely. This child clearly has a submissive and obedient appearance, why is his favorability just not moving? This won't be completed until the year of monkeys and horses. The system couldn't bear her to mess around, and in order to encourage her to continue the task, it offered an excellent condition to lure her. Take a step back, no matter who was being abused, as long as you can make them have a 100% liking for you, become a flesh and blood person, and fulfill your wish. Any wish, who wouldn't be tempted to see it? Zhu Yao stared at the peach, blinked and smiled, this is what you were asked to pick and eat for yourself. The second elder painstakingly watered the spiritual plant with spiritual power, and eating it is beneficial for improving the roots and bones. Su Ling's eyes were slightly brighter, clearly happy. She nodded and said with a smile, I know second senior brother is very strict, so I specifically asked you to go. Will you blame me? Su Ling shook her head, lowered her eyebrows and said with a pleasing expression, I understand the master's intention. Thank you very much, master. Zhu Yao smiled and said, you can be taught. I will continue to go tomorrow and start picking 2 tomorrow. She is still greedy. Staring at the dusty cheek of Zhang Junlang, the blush was a bit glaring. She raised her hand and lightly touched it, causing Su Ling to instinctively step back. Realizing that it was not appropriate, she hesitated and leaned her face closer. I'm sorry, master. Zhu Yao shook her head. It was such a small matter that she didn't really want to blame him. She took out a small porcelain vase from her arms and stuffed it into his hand. Take good medication. With such a handsome face, leaving scars in the future won't look good. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a system beep in her mind and said in a cold mechanical voice, my current favorability is 0.1. Zhu Yao. Did you get it wrong? I gave him medicine, but his favorability decreased instead. The system also panicked, wait a moment, I'll check again. After a few breaths, the system hesitated and said, I did miscalculate earlier. Zhu Yao breathed a sigh of relief and said, I'll just tell you, how could you have such white eyes? Favorite rating 0.2, currently favorable rating is 0.2. Zhu Yao. She re-examined Su Ling, who was kneeling before her and had a mischievous expression on her face. There is always one between Su Ling and the system who is crazy. She asked, Su Ling, do you have any dissatisfaction with being a teacher? Su Ling raised her eyes in confusion, then her face turned pale and fearful, constantly kowtowing, Master, don't drive away your disciples. I'll listen to you for everything. Zhu Yao looked at this scene, then at the system, and said to the system, tell me, does his appearance seem to give me a negative score? The system has started to play dead again. The horizontal and vertical systems are not reliable, and it's not like a day or 2. The garbage system cannot be updated and replaced in a timely manner, and it's normal for bugs to occur. She helped Su Ling up and spoke softly, I won't drive you away, I don't have time to like you. Do you like me? I like it. Su Ling glanced at her for a moment, then quickly lowered her head. She could only see Su Ling's red earbuds. Patted his head and said, then you promise to become a teacher, no matter what happens in the future, you won't be allowed to become a teacher with a knife. Su Ling was anxious and quickly explained, how could I possibly do such a thing of deceiving my master and destroying my ancestors? Zhu Yao was very pleased and rubbed his hair twice, be good. With a loud bang, the porcelain fell to the ground. Zhu Yao looked out the door and saw Qi Lian's eyes turning red as she looked at Zhu Yao, as if she was still looking at her disloyal wife. Zhu Yao paused, pondering that she had not done anything out of line, but silently withdrew the hand that caressed Qi Lian's head. Her gaze wandered between the two, and her heart was clear that she was truly a villain. In just a few days, it had seduced the heart of her most adorable disciple. So if she wants to complete the strategy task, isn't she going to compete with her disciples for men? She was full of excitement. The author of this book is really amusing. However, it's fun. She waved and called for Qi Lian to come over, smiling and saying, why do you have time to find me as a teacher today? When mentioning Qi Lian, she became even more aggrieved, her eyes tinged with a hint of blush. Her watery eyes looked at her and said, Master has always loved to eat peach blossom pastry. I made a special delivery for Master today, but my hand slipped and I smashed it just now. This appearance made Zhu Yao feel heartbroken and quickly pulled her to comfort her. It's okay, it's okay. Did you hurt your hand? It's not good if you hurt your hand. She pulled Qi Lian back and forth, her hands white and soft, her fingers slender and her bones distinct, making Zhu Yao envious. She touched them a few more times and couldn't bear to let go. DD, favorability rating is 0.3, currently favorability rating is 0.5. Upon hearing the system reminder, Zhu Yao instinctively shook Qi Lian's hand away and looked at Su Ling. Su Ling stood there, pursed her lips and remained silent, unable to discern joy, anger, sorrow, or joy. Her expression did not show any signs, but rather a hint of envy. She was taken aback and asked the system, what's going on? If it can be materialized, it can be seen that the system is spreading its hands. I don't know. I don't know what to do with this system after asking 3 questions. Zhu Yao suddenly noticed that Su Ling's gaze was fixed on Qi Lian. Following her gaze, she saw Qi Lian looking pitifully at herself. A bold conjecture emerged in her mind. Su Ling, isn't he in love with Qi Lian? She couldn't help but start weighing again whether to give up any wish after completing the strategy, and fulfilled this pair of hard-working mandarin ducks. She didn't speak, but Qi Lian couldn't hold her anger anymore. He carefully tugged at the corner of her clothes and asked, what's wrong with Master? It hurt so much when you shook my hand just now. After hearing her say this, she let go of her previous thoughts and took Qi Lian's hand to blow. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt. Qi Lian nodded obediently. Zhu Yao felt puzzled and looked at Su Ling, saying, you go out first. I'll have a few words with Qi Lian, my teacher. Su Ling looked at the two of them with a hint of depth in her eyes, especially when she saw Qi Lian secretly looking at him with a provocative gaze. She unconsciously lowered her gaze and responded, yes. I don't know if it's Zhu Yao's illusion or what, but I feel a bit lonely in his back. Qi Lian was actually happy and asked with a smile, what does Master want to say to me? Zhu Yao pondered and said, do you like Su Ling? Qi Lian's smile collapsed a bit. Why does Master think so? Zhu Yao thought she hit her heart and made this skinny little girl feel embarrassed. She raised her hand and pinched her face, a cute and handsome man, truly a perfect match. She smiled and said, don't be shy. If you like him, I can give you a lead and turn a blind eye on weekdays. Qi Lian looked at her with a slightly strange expression, as if trying to explain something, but couldn't say a word. After a moment of silence, he said, no, Master. I have someone I like for 4 years. Zhu Yao paused for a moment. Did she think wrong? She originally wanted to ask why he had a strange magnetic field with Su Ling, an indescribable feeling. But she didn't ask, she was still a little curious about another thing. Which martial brother does Xiaoyan like? Qi Lian's face turned red and she hesitated. I'm young now. I'll tell my master when I reach adulthood. Zhu Yao treated her as too shy and smiled kindly. I don't know if I was too shy, but I turned around and ran away. Zhu Yao shook her head, sat back, picked up the teacup and took a sip. The tea cooled down, and the bitterness became a bit stronger. Staring at her reflection in the green tea, she couldn't help but shake her head and think of something she had always forgotten. System, it seems like you never told me who the male and female leads are. The system remained silent for a while and said, the only line you need to maintain is the villain line. Knowing more will affect the development of the entire book. What is there to influence a book that has already collapsed? Maybe I can purposefully save the male and female protagonists and prevent them from being killed by the villains. System. No permission. It's really perfunctory. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. 004, That's How You Spoil Her. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4004. That's How You Spoil Her. For some reason, after Zhu Yao had a romantic conversation with Qi Lian that day, she seemed to have avoided herself to some extent. Zhu Yao only thought for a moment, and then understood. The Qingxiu sect has a big mouth for gossip, talking about her. She started lying flat at a young age and didn't have to be as introverted as a disciple, nor did she have to worry about trivial matters like a few elders, senior brothers, and sisters. She likes to inquire about gossip like a ghost and then spread it out. Previously, she would have said, I am someone who keeps my mouth shut. If there is any empty talk, it will strike like thunder and lightning. Later on, she was really struck by the thunder that crossed the tribulation, and inexplicably broke through the great perfection of the golden elixir. It's really a bit interesting. Later on, in order to save her life, she never spoke big words again, but despite this, she was well liked by everyone, approachable, and liked to gossip with her. Enjoy this tirelessly. Qi Lian is worried that she will reveal the matter of Qi Lian's crush. Just kidding, is she this kind of person? Oh, she is this kind of person. As soon as Qi Lian left her dormitory, the news spread about her future. She acted like a carefree person, wandering around like a street wanderer all day, except for not going to Yan Qingrui very much. That guy is the most ferocious. Su Ling didn't come back until evening today. When she found Zhu Yao, she was upside down with a book rolled up on her face, sleeping soundly on the acacia tree in the yard. The clothes winding down were stacked and folded, floating with the gentle breeze. The light gauze was like cicada wings or feathers moving lightly. Su Ling's eyes were dim and unclear. She reached out her hand and stopped, rubbing against the tattered clothes before pulling down Zhu Yao's hanging clothes. The texture was very soft, which made him feel a bit dazed for a moment. Zhu Yao woke up leisurely, glanced down and gave a smirk. Su Ling, why don't you call me a teacher when you come? Su Ling's clothes were cut several times by swords, and blood seeped out. His hair, which was neatly crowned, was also quite messy. His face was particularly delicate and cold. Zhu Yao vaguely heard that his disciples in the sect said he had a rebellious and solitary personality, disdainful of making friends with others, and therefore had poor social connections. She flipped over and fell in front of him, looking down at him. Su Ling had only reached her chest now, and at this age, she was growing wildly. It wouldn't be long before she was taller than her. She pinched Su Ling's cheek and asked, "Did you used to be so lonely?" Su Ling didn't speak or dodge. Zhu Yao heard a beep from the system and said, "Favorite rating +2, currently favorable rating is 0.3. She paused and glanced at her hand, which was still resting on Su Ling's face. The soft flesh in her hand was a bit tight, different from Qi Lian's touch, but both were quite comfortable. She brushed her fingertips over the thin, scabbed scar on his cheek and hissed, "Second senior brother, you're really ruthless." Pulling Su Ling, she said, "Let's go, I'll take you to apply medicine." Su Ling let her hold her hand and followed behind, his gaze fixed on the hand they were holding together, unsure of what he was thinking. Zhu Yao led him into the dormitory and asked him to take off his clothes. Looking at the sword wounds on his waist, abdomen, and back, he couldn't help but say, Yan Qingrui is really not a good person. Su Ling turned her back and left her weak back to be drugged. Her voice reached Zhu Yao's ear from the front, second senior uncle has already let me down a lot. Zhu Yao smiled twice and said, he's just a sharp-tongued tofu heart. If he says he won't help you, he still has to help. Su Ling did not respond. There was a moment of silence in the atmosphere. But not long after, Zhu Yao heard him speak and said, I heard from the senior brothers of the sect that I have no immortal fate at all. I opened my mind late and cannot practice. Is that true, master? Zhu Yao casually said, don't listen to their nonsense. You are the disciple of Elder Zhu Yao's own lineage. Can I let you waste it? It doesn't exist, but you must remain calm. Biography. Su Ling murmured in a low voice, as if unsure, and asked softly, Master treated me as a disciple of the biography. Ong. Zhu Yao blew on his wound, applied medicine, and said, what are you so suspicious of? I went to the name-keeping bureau and hung a sign to light the soul lamp. Can there still be a fake? DD, favorability +3, currently favorability is 0. Zhu Yao raised her eyebrows, finally equalized. This kid really values this trick, no wonder he has a deep love affair. If he doesn't lick him, his liking won't increase at all. But he is a cold and indifferent person by nature, and licking too much will only make him develop a rebellious mentality, or suspect that the other party has ulterior motives. So, while accepting the kindness of others with peace of mind, one can also show disgust without leaving any trace. Zhu Yao only found out Su Ling's thoughts from the changes in her favoritism today. What an awkward person. She stuffed the medicine bottle and handed it to Su Ling, saying, you can take care of the wound on your waist and abdomen yourself. I know you've reached the age to avoid suspicion. Also, Ong, I have sent you to accompany Elder Heir for training because I want to first exercise your muscles and bones, and refine your foundation. I will handle it for you on my own, so don't worry. Su Ling's voice was clear and cold, and she said, thank you, master. Go ahead. Zhu Yao took a peach from his arms and patted his shoulder, asking him to leave. Su Ling stood at the door, her slender fingers resting on the doorframe for a moment, then turned back to look at her. Master, do you know who Sister Qi likes? Zhu Yao was chewing a peach in her mouth, looking at him in surprise and jokingly saying, I can't tell. Su Ling is still gossiping. Su Ling's ears seemed to be slightly flushed, distorted in the afterglow. His voice drifted softly, I didn't. Zhu Yao. So why did you suddenly ask this? Do you know who Qi Lian likes? Su Ling raised her eyes and looked at her through the air, as if she had something to say. After a moment of silence, she shook her head and said, I don't know. Zhu Yao grinned but didn't pay much attention. After he left, he gritted his teeth and said, children nowadays really know how to play. In addition to the sect leader, there are also 4 elders of the Qingshu sect. After the sect leader closed, Yan Qingrui became the acting sect leader. Knowing that this guy didn't like him, Zhu Yao has been going out less recently. Third senior sister is gentle and intellectual. Whenever she gets something good in her leisure time, she will share it with her. She ranks 4th, so it goes without saying. Another thing is Xiao Laowu. Since the sect leader closed down, he has gone down the mountain to do tasks. Among these elders, he is the busiest. In charge of the task department, he is responsible for assigning small tasks, and for big tasks, he needs to personally take action. He is also honest and hardworking. 5 junior brothers, have you encountered some difficulties while descending the mountain for so long? Zhu Yao and her 3rd senior sister Yunqing sat opposite each other, playing gamoku with nothing to do. She suddenly accepted the black box and felt a bit bored, so she casually asked. Ah, it's okay, but it's not difficult. It's mainly time-consuming. He's investigating something, Yun Qing said seriously. Zhu Yao vaguely guessed what it was and didn't ask much. It would be great if he could come back and gather a table of cards. Everyone is so busy that they can't even gather all the cards. Yun Qing smiled and said, why don't you call Qi Lian to fight? She should have time. Zhu Yao scratched her head and said, Xiao Yanlian, let's forget it. She doesn't have any spiritual stones to earn in her hands. When she starts crying, I'll have to stick to them. Yun Qing said with a smile, that's all you're spoiling her for. She is my disciple, who should spoil her if I don't spoil her? Yun Qing smiled and shook his head, without saying much. As soon as she fell from the dark spot, she heard a disciple hurriedly passing a message from outside, Master, third elder, it's not good. Senior sister Qi Lian and junior brother Su Ling are fighting. Zhu Yao and Yun Qing exchanged a glance. Yun Qing was somewhat puzzled, how could the two of them get into a fight? One is cute, the other is aloof, completely out of place, no one expected how it would start fighting. Zhu Yao remained calm and composed, everyone was arrested according to the rules of the sect and dealt with fairly. Yun Qing wanted to say something more, but when she saw Zhu Yao's calm expression, she swallowed back the unspoken words. Zhu Yao is used to having a playful and smiling face on weekdays. As long as she keeps a straight face, people will know that she is angry. She mostly knows why, but it's been a long time since this happened, and for some reason she can't let go. The sect strictly prohibits disciples from engaging in private brawls, especially since both of them are her own disciples. They do not lead by example and spread rumors to make people laugh. The disciple hesitated to speak for a moment and asked, Master, won't you come over and take a look? Zhu Yao said coldly, aren't you going to fight? Let them fight. The disciple remained silent and left silently, afraid of harming the innocent. Yun Qing patted her hand and said, don't get angry. It's normal to argue when you're young. Don't worry about second senior brother talking about you. You don't want this either. I'll go persuade him. She didn't stop and said goodbye before leaving. Zhu Yao propped up her head, lowered her head, and a gloomy aura lingered around her. She is very averse to disciple fights because of some past events. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. 005 Stealing My Clothes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5005. Stealing My Clothes. After adjusting her emotions, Zhu Yao couldn't sit idly by and headed towards the side hall where Su Ling lived, carrying a pot of wine. In order to accelerate the progress of the strategy, she had already invited Su Ling to stay in the Indian. After all, she was a disciple passed down by herself and living with external disciples, which is truly outrageous. The night of Qingshu's sect is beautiful. Just as she arrived at the door, she hadn't knocked yet and saw that the door was open. She had a keen sense of smell and smelled the faint smell of blood emanating from inside. She looked up and took a sip of wine. Pushed open the door directly. Su Ling casually pulled on her clothes and put them on, her gaze icy as she looked towards Zhu Yao. After seeing Zhu Yao, her expression immediately softened, feeling a bit at a loss. Master, why did you suddenly come? He was only wearing an undershirt, with his shirt unbuttoned and half of his chest exposed. Compared to his frailty when he first met, his body is now much stronger. Seemingly sensing Zhu Yao's gaze, Su Ling inexplicably tightened her clothes. Zhu Yao withdrew her gaze and said, turn around. Master. What's going on? You're not even listening to Master's words. Su Ling had to turn around and, under the bright moonlight, could see his white inner garment, with a blood-red tint behind him. The punishment for fighting among disciples of the sect is whipping. She placed a can of medicine on the table and said, why did you fight? Su Ling knelt down in front of her with a thud. Master, I understand my mistake. The incident of Zhu Yao losing her temper today mostly spread to the ears of the two people involved in the fight, and then they stopped fighting and stopped fighting. To know one's mistake, one must first explain where the mistake lies. Su Ling, you shouldn't have fought with senior sister Qi. The reason for the fight. Su Ling stopped talking. Zhu Yao sat at the table in his room and looked down at Su Ling, who was kneeling on the ground. He pressed his brow with a headache. Just say it. After a moment of silence, Su Ling lowered her head and spoke softly. Senior sister Qi said, she likes her master and wants me to stay away from him. I don't want to. Is that why? Zhu Yao had a headache. Even more, she felt for a moment that the two of them were really childish, and she didn't know who to say was more childish, like a child playing house. Su Ling knelt down and took 2 steps forward, gently tugging at the corner of her clothes. Master, I know I'm wrong. Master, don't leave me behind. I'll listen, she said. Zhu Yao ignored for a while, only to hear sobs. When she opened her eyes, she saw Su Ling with her head lowered, her shoulders slightly raised, and she looked like she was crying. She couldn't bear to see the beauty shed tears, so she raised her hand and touched his hair. Stop crying, how can you be like Qi Lian? Su Ling is aloof and aloof, with a cold face all day long, almost writing. Do not disturb strangers. It seems that only in front of her can such a look be revealed. I really ate it to death. I wish Yao a soft heart. I don't mean to blame you, I just don't want this kind of thing to happen again. I know I was wrong. He rubbed his cheek against Zhu Yao's hand and looked up with a pitiful expression, causing Zhu Yao to take a deep breath. He spoke softly with a hint of pleading, Master, my disciple's back hurts so much. Can you help me apply medicine? At a young age, I don't know who I learned to be so coquettish from. If I had grown up, I would still be able to do it. Go lie down on the soft couch, Zhu Yao said. Su Ling's eyelashes trembled lightly, and she stepped forward in response. She took off her shirt and leaned down on the couch, with vertical and horizontal whip wounds on her back. The whip hit her bones, leaving her flesh and blood blurred. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, thinking of Qi Lian. She had originally planned to get closer to this place, so she sent medicine to Su Ling first and went to Qi Lian's place. After treating this wound, I don't know if Qi Lian will fall asleep in that area. She lowered her eyes and saw Su Ling's eyes fall on her, with a few stages of Su mixed in between her gloomy eyes. Confrontation and silence. He spoke softly, Master, are you going to see senior sister? Zhu Yao sighed and shook her head. I will first apply medicine for you, Master. The palms and backs of the hands are all flesh, so favoring that one is not enough. Qi Lian's place can only be passed later. She took the medicine and poured the powder onto her wound. I took the cotton and wiped it away, causing her body to tremble slightly. She gritted her teeth and said nothing. The injury is too severe, you have to endure the pain, Zhu Yao said, her strength not letting go. Su Ling remained silent from beginning to end. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door and said, Junior brother Su, have you ever seen your master? It was the voice of a female disciple, with a somewhat anxious tone, and I don't know what happened. Zhu Yaoyang said in a voice, I'm inside the house. Is there anything I can do to find a teacher for? The disciple outside the door became even more anxious. Master, hurry up and take a look at Senior Qi. She was whipped today and just passed out in pain. The blood behind her couldn't stop. Zhu Yao frowned slightly, put down her hand and stood up to leave, with a corner of her sleeve pulled. Su Ling's gaze was deep and he said softly, Master, she's pretending. Don't leave. Zhu Yao took his hand away and said, Su Ling, she is your senior sister and a woman. She can't bear the whipping. As a teacher, I have to go see her. But she pretended. Zhu Yao was puzzled and said, how do you know she's pretending? She remembered that the system had mentioned the description of Su Ling in the book, which was sinister and insane. At such a young age, I have learned to talk nonsense. Su Ling pursed her lips and remained silent, her eyes fixed on her. I don't care if you two have any issues, you shouldn't slander her, Su Ling. Zhu Yao left without looking back. After all, Qi Lian has been with her for 4 years, and this kid has only been with her for 4 months. Anyway, Qi Lian holds more weight in her heart. She just came here because she was close. As soon as she stepped out of the door, a system prompt sounded in her mind. Didi, the favorability rating is 0.10, currently the favorability rating is 0.10. She paused in her footsteps without turning back. She is not like an ordinary strategist, there is no need to brush favorability for the sake of it, and the favorability gained through acting is not what she wants. She's not in a hurry, the system is in a hurry. Qi Lian can't die again. Can't you just calm him down first before going? Zhu Yao replied, it takes both joy and anger for Su Ling to become a living person, right? His favorability can decrease, indicating that Zhu Yao has touched his emotions. Since it can touch his emotions, there is no fear that it cannot go up. The system is not speaking anymore. Rao is that Zhu Yao is not very familiar with the system, and she can see that her system is mostly an intellectually disabled person with a high level of coldness. Not to mention her low level, her brain is also not easy to use, and her mind is only filled with favorability. She even attempts to manipulate her thoughts and turn her into a puppet to complete tasks. Zhu Yao has not lived in vain these years. If she could be called Zhu Yao in a few words, she wouldn't be called Zhu Yao. As a disciple passed down by Qi Lian, in order to facilitate her cultivation, Zhu Yao separately created a courtyard for her, which is not far from Indian, about 100 steps away. A few good disciples who usually play with her sat around her bed, looking worried. Seeing Zhu Yao lie, their eyes lit up and they quickly let her debut. Qi Lian lay motionless on the bed, wearing only a belly bag on her upper body, with whip marks on her back no less than Su Ling's. Su Ling is actually a man, with a stronger body and bones than Qi Lian. The injury just now looked terrifying, and now seeing Qi Lian's delicate skin and tender flesh on his back is also flesh and blood blurred, he feels a bit heartbroken. Stepping forward and exploring Qi Lian's mind, he silently withdrew his hand. She gave the medicine to one of her female disciples and asked her to help apply it to Qi Lian, while she sat aside to drink tea without saying a word. Another disciple, upon seeing the situation, approached and said, although senior sister has something wrong with this matter, after being beaten, it's time to write it off. Zhu Yao shook her head and said, I just don't understand why I got into a fight over such a small matter. Qi Lian has a lively and outgoing nature, and occasionally says a few arrogant words that are favored by her. She is also willing to get used to it, it's not a big deal. But Su Ling is different. He has always been indifferent and surprisingly follows in his mischief. The disciple pursed his lips and said, it's not that junior brother Su coveted the master. At a young age, his mind is not right. This is the first time Zhu Yao has heard this and asked, how do you say it? The disciple hesitated for a moment when he saw that she didn't know yet. He glanced at Qi Lian on the bed and said, junior brother Su stole the master's obscene clothes. Senior sister was only angry and asked him to stay away from the master. He didn't hear it. Senior sister was angry for a while, so she started fighting with him. Stealing and hiding my clothes. Zhu Yao felt a bit confused. Su Ling wouldn't do such a thing, Zhu Yao knew it in her heart. The disciple became anxious when he saw that she didn't believe him. Master, what I said is absolutely true. If there were any empty words, it would be like thunder and lightning. When senior sister went to find him, she even saw him holding your clothes to sleep. Zhu Yao pondered for a moment and remembered something. The clothes that had been torn by Su Ling before were later sewn and sent back by Su Ling, but she never wore them again and casually discarded them somewhere. She had originally planned to destroy it together with other objects, but later found out that her clothes were gone and she didn't pay much attention. So it seems that Su Ling took it. End of this chapter. Chapter 6006. Don't be a fool as a teacher. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6006. Don't be a fool as a teacher, it's not a big deal. Zhu Yao lowered her eyebrows and eyes and said, he has just gone through the extermination of his family. It's a fragile time. I brought him to Zhushan and taught him carefully. It's normal for him to have a crush on me. When he grows a few years older, he will understand. Zhu Yao raised her eyes and looked at the disciple in front of her. You all know he's young, and you're going to bully him. If you become a teacher again, you'll be angry. The disciple saw this and his lips closed for a while, drooping his head and saying, we didn't bully him either. It's because he's stupid and can't do anything well. He's not you, he doesn't have innate wisdom, it's difficult to learn. What you need to do is to help more, not ridicule. This is the Qingshu sect. Qingshu's sect has always been known for its harmony and unity. I realized my mistake. Zhu Yao. It's good to know your mistakes. After the disciples gave Qi Lian good medicine, Zhu Yao asked them to go and rest earlier. The disciples left and also brought the door with them. Qi Lian remained motionless. Zhu Yao sighed and put down the teacup. Qi Lian, do you plan to pretend to sleep until tomorrow morning? Qi Lian turned her head and looked at her. Her watery eyes made her swallow the angry words that reached her mouth. Why pretend to be dizzy? Zhu Yao asked. Qi Lian's long eyelashes trembled and her voice was a bit aggrieved. Master, go see him first. If I'm not as good as this, isn't Master planning on coming to see me? Zhu Yao remained silent for a while. Qi Lian's eyelashes trembled even more fiercely, and her voice was soft. I'm sorry, Master. I was wrong, I was really wrong. I won't make it difficult for junior brother Su again in the future. Zhu Yao sighed and said, you heard what you said earlier. He is still young and has encountered unexpected situations. It is a sensitive and lacking time for love. As a teacher, I need to take care of him more. Don't let my teacher know that you will find it difficult for him in the future, otherwise the Qingshu sect won't be able to retain people with ulterior motives. Qi Lian obediently responded, I know, Master. Zhu Yao said, also, don't make me a fool as a teacher. She just turns a blind eye to many things, which doesn't mean she's not clear. Early in the morning, she knew that no matter what, Qi Lian was born into a spirit and had been practicing for 4 years. Although the punishment was severe, it could not reach the point of fainting. On the contrary, Su Ling, as a commoner, suffered even more severe injuries. But Su Ling was able to know for the first time that Qi Lian was pretending, and it was obvious that the two of them were secretly vying with her to see who she would choose to believe or lean towards. The next day, Zhu Yao personally went to apologize to Su Ling with Qi Lian who could go down to the ground. Watching Qi Lian bend down to apologize, Su Ling's eyes were deep and she didn't know what she was thinking. After a while, she said, I was also at fault for fighting with senior sister. It's my fault to apologize to senior sister. Zhu Yao was very pleased and rubbed Su Ling's head. There's no need to pick peaches during this period. Take good care of yourself, and there's still 1 month left. Go to the East China Sea and prepare for each one. When Yunqing came to find Zhu Yao again, he brought her a grass-woven grasshopper and presented it to Zhu Yao like a treasure. It was a very simple and small thing, but Zhu Yao was stunned for a moment before accepting it with a smile. Did the 5th junior brother send it? Zhu Yao asked with a smile. Yunqing also smiled and said, yes, he passed by a small town and saw someone weaving grasshoppers on the roadside. He bought one and brought it from afar. This kind of craftsmanship is rare. Zhu Yao smiled and asked again, what is that city called? Yunqing remained silent for a moment and said, Qingzhou, in Qingzhou. Zhu Yao nodded and said, it's quite close to the East China Sea. I'll go for a walk then. Yunqing's expression was somewhat obscure and difficult to understand. Zhu Yao, this has been a long time. You should let go of the past, let go of yourself. Zhu Yao lowered her eyes and stared at the grasshopper in her hand, smiling, don't worry, senior sister. I understand everything. Upon hearing her say this, Yunqing's face lit up with a hint of a smile and he changed the topic. You still have good guidance. I heard that the relationship between your two personally transmitted disciples has eased a lot now. Zhu Yao leaned back on the lounge chair and said, we're all children, and we only have 2 days of arguments. How could there really be any grudges or grievances? Yunqing said, also, Su Ling has just climbed the mountain for a short time, and over time, he has gradually adapted. However, Zhu Yao, how do you view Su Ling's cultivation? Su Ling is just a mortal body, and it is not easy to cultivate. Zhu Yao naturally understands. She smiled and said, aren't I going to the East China Sea this time? The East China Sea is vast and rich in resources, with countless treasures and treasures. There will always be someone who can enlighten him. Just ask and he will come. Yunqing frowned slightly and said, what you said is quite easy. There are many treasures in the East China Sea, but it is a place where there is a master, and you can take whatever you want with you. Zhu Yao spread out her hands and said, I have to give it a try. Yunqing said, I hope Su Ling can understand your kindness. Zhu Yao said, I must have told him openly that I was good to him. Isn't hiding something inexplicably causing a misunderstanding? Because it will be too late to regret the misunderstanding in the future. In the book, Zhu Yao loves to hide her kindness to him, like a saint sacrificing herself. She doesn't want this emotion to be mixed with any impurities, but it backfires. She is suspected by Su Ling, and the two gradually become separated, leading to a tragic ending. She chuckled lightly and caught a glimpse of a person standing under the eaves, who was Su Ling wearing a pure and noble robe. Zhu Yao smiled at him and waved, we were talking about you. Come over and have a cup of tea, and by the way, let me know how your medicinal bath went. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a sudden system voice in her mind. DD, favorability rating .2, currently favorability rating .12. Accustomed to not knowing whether the system was sick or Su Ling was sick, she had no idea about this data and still smiled on her face. Su Ling's face showed no signs of displeasure. After hesitating for a moment, she walked towards him and sat down. Yunqing calmly poured him a cup of tea. Are there any discomforts with the medicinal bath these days? Zhu Yao asked with a smile. Su Ling arched her hand and said, at first, I felt a stabbing pain all over my body. After a few times, I felt better. Every time I finished taking the medicine bath, I felt energetic. Yunqing chuckled lightly and said, that's not an ordinary medicinal bath. It's your master's treasure. It's hard to find 1,000 coins. I asked her before, but she didn't give it. It's all for you, which shows how much I value you. Zhu Yao coughed and said, senior sister, this is too serious. You can only use it as a tonic at most. It's different to use it on him to make the most of everything. She glanced at Su Ling twice more and saw him staring at the teacup in a daze, unsure of what he was thinking. She patted Su Ling's head and said, you need to persist in using the medicinal bath. You can first transform your external body, and you need to go to the East China Sea first to talk about your internal spiritual roots. Su Ling nodded and spoke softly, thank you, master. Zhu Yao smiled and remained silent. This kid is really hard to figure out. While thanking himself, his liking for him didn't improve at all. She saw Yunqing off and turned back to the courtyard. Su Ling was still standing in the same place, her hands naturally hanging down, her eyes fixed on her, mixed with emotions she couldn't understand. Is there anything else, Su Ling? Su Ling looked at her her lips closed and she didn't utter a word, just shook her head. Zhu Yao glanced at him and thought of taking a nap, but when he passed by, he still stopped in his tracks. Looking at him sideways, Su Ling, I know you have hatred in your heart, but your hatred should not be borne by the entire Qingshu sect. The purpose of the Qingshu sect is harmony and unity, and it has never mistreated you. You don't need to think that anyone has ulterior motives to approach you. There is nothing you can do at the moment. Su Ling's firm back twitched slightly, his eyes lowered, and he said, Master, I don't know what you're talking about. Zhu Yao raised her hand and dragged his chin, asking him to look up at her. Her eyes were as bright as obsidian, clear as a child of this age should have. I don't know, it's okay, just remember what I said as a teacher. No one in the Qingshu sect owes you anything, she gently touched Su Ling's face. Su Ling pursed her lips and looked at her without speaking for a while. Didi, positive rating +5, currently positive rating 0.7. Zhu Yao nodded with satisfaction, it seemed that she had listened. She rubbed Su Ling's head and said, let's go rest. Okay, Su Ling replied, her gaze never leaving her. She followed her figure back to the hall, closed the door, and cut off his sight. He lowered his eyes, with a hint of depth in them. Zhu Yao, we can't go to Donghai for now. Zhu Yao received the transmission note early in the morning and was urged to come to the conference hall. Yan Qingrui did not beat around the bush and left a straightforward sentence. She blinked and woke up from her slumber, questioning, second senior brother, although you don't deal with me, you shouldn't restrict me from going out, right? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. 0071 or 2 Our Ancestors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7007. Both our ancestors. Yan Qingrui's face was very unpleasant. When did I become such a person who seeks personal gain through public service? Today's words are a kind reminder, don't be ignorant. The leader is in seclusion, and the fifth junior brother is doing the task. Today, Shi, Yunqing, and Yan Qingrui are the only three in the elder meeting. Yunqing quickly smiled and tried to smooth things out, this is not the time for you two to argue. Sit down and have a good conversation. What are you doing in such a hurry? Zhu Yao grinned at Yunqing and said, listen to senior sister. Then he glanced sideways at Yan Qingrui and leaned against Yunqing, leaning on a chair with a boneless appearance. Yan Qingrui couldn't help but feel angry when he saw her appearance. Are you unable to sit up straight? How could you have the demeanor of an elder? Oh my, I'm so scared. She hugged Yunqing's arm and pretended. As Yan Qingrui was about to get angry, Yunqing felt his scalp tingling and hurriedly said, Senior brother, let's get to the point. Yan Qingrui finally held back his breath and said, you have such a temper. You have gone out of the Qingshu sect, where can we accommodate you? He sat down angrily, his anger lingering, and said, the old dragon king of the East China Sea is going to abdicate. The dragon son has taken the throne, and it is a turbulent time. You cannot go. Zhu Yao smiled brightly and said, I think it's a big deal, that's all. Then I have to go even further. Yan Qingrui widened his eyes and stared at her, are you genuinely angry with me? It's a matter of life, how could you be joking? Upon hearing this, Yunqing also advised, Zhu Yao, we didn't have deep contact with the East China Sea, so we shouldn't wade through this muddy water. If something happens within the East China Sea, we won't be able to go there in a timely manner. Yan Qingrui said, Qi Lian has a calamity when she reaches adulthood. Returning to the East China Sea is nothing more than a peace of mind, but currently the East China Sea is not peaceful. It's better to stay in the Qingshu sect and cross the calamity. With our protectors, there won't be any problems. Zhu Yao caught a glimpse of their worried expressions and smiled, but I have a reason to have to go this time. Yan Qingrui snorted coldly, you always add to the chaos. What reason do you have to go? Yunqing was sandwiched between the two, feeling somewhat helpless. Zhu Yao gave her a reassuring look and calmly took out a rosewood plaque from her arms, along with a token of respect. The red sandalwood plaque is gilded and engraved with the words, Qingshu, which is recognized by everyone. It is a token of the leader and a symbol of the leader's identity. Yan Qingrui's expression was somewhat unpleasant. Why did the leader hand over the leader's order to you? Zhu Yao said, Hey, senior brother, don't just have long eyes and won't be able to read. Isn't there another letter of worship here? She held the invitation with her spiritual power and delivered it to Yan Qingrui. After reading it, his expression slightly changed. Yun Qing also saw the clues and used magic to take the prayer stick from his hand into his own hand. After reading it, his expression also changed slightly. He looked up at Zhu Yao and said, Senior brother, the leader, is really confused. How could he ask you to come and visit at this critical moment? Zhu Yao smiled and withdrew the petition, putting it back in her arms. She casually said, Senior brother in charge has his own ideas. Don't forget that he is a skilled hand in divination. Since he left such a petition for me before May, he must have known that something was going to happen in the East China Sea. I happen to handle 3 things together. One is the incident of Qi Lian crossing the robbery as an adult. Secondly, it is to seek the soul-washing medicine for Su Ling. San Lai followed the arrangement of the head senior brother and presented a small gift. Yan Qingrui pursed his lips and furrowed his brow, as if he could catch a fly. His face looked a bit ugly. It's really ridiculous. You're just acting recklessly, and the leader's senior brother should also follow along. He doesn't think you've caused enough trouble, does he? How could he ask you to do such a thing? Saying so much in one breath shows that Yan Qingrui is truly angry. Zhu Yao stirred her sleeves with both hands and said, Second senior brother's words are not pleasing to the ear. No matter how much trouble I cause, I haven't pierced the sky, have I? If I don't go to the East China Sea to pay respects to 1 or 2, it's as if I will turn the East China Sea upside down. Yan Qingrui gave her a cold glance and said, Who knows if you can do it? Zhu Yao exclaimed in surprise, Wow, second senior brother, I didn't expect you to believe in my abilities so much. But unfortunately, you obviously overestimated me. I really can't do it. She pulled on her sleeve to cover her face, leaving only a pair of eyes twirling. Her cunning appearance made Yan Qingrui furious. You! Senior brother, Yun Qing stopped in time and said, since it was arranged by the head senior brother, there is certainly his reason, and everything should go with the flow. Yan Shengriki picked up the teacup and drank it in one gulp. He impatiently waved his hand and said, let's go now. Seeing you makes me feel annoyed. Zhu Yao stood up straight with a smile and said, there's nothing else. I won't disturb your elderly home for now. Goodbye. Speaking without a trace, Yun Qing couldn't even stop shouting. He glanced at the door without a trace, then at Yan Qingrui, who was extremely angry, and let out a sigh. Master senior brother's actions must have his reasons, probably related to senior brother Xiao. Yan Qingrui raised his forehead. Xiao Linze has been dead for 10 years. The soul lamp is off, and Genshin impact is scattered. Where can we find people? Yun Qing said, it's really hard to say that. Fifth junior brother wrote a letter saying that he has found signs. There is a personal aura that looks very similar to senior brother Xiao. The last time I felt that aura was in Qingzhou, which is close to the East China Sea. Perhaps there is really a connection. Yan Qingrui snorted, destiny has its own destiny. We watched Xiao Linze die in Zhu Yao's arms with our own eyes. Can there be any falsehood or falsehood? Maybe this is the bait set by someone, attracting people to fall for it. The two of them have their own opinions, and neither can convince the other. Zhu Yao returned to the Inn Palace and greeted his disciples with a smile all the way. Along the way, he saw Su Ling walking towards a remote place and stopped him. Su Ling, go inform Qi Lian and ask her to prepare. We will depart from the East China Sea today. Su Ling seems to be taking a slow beat, always getting a little dull before nodding and saying hello. When Qi Lian arrived, she was carrying a small package on her shoulder, bulging and unsure of what it contained. Zhu Yao smiled at her and said, "Didn't you carry the pot on your back?" Qi Lian's eyes lit up. "Master really reminded me." Zhu Yao's eyelids twitched and he hurriedly said, "Don't bring the pot. We're not going to flee." Qi Lian looked at her eagerly, "But I want to make dim sum for Shizhuan. Shizhuan is used to what I make, and others can't do it." Zhu Yao felt quite amused and said, "I have already cleared the valley. Even if I don't eat, it's not a big deal. There's no need to go too far. It shouldn't be long, maybe a month." What she said is not certain. Qi Lian was shriveled and said, "My dim sum are all dispensable in your opinion." Zhu Yao slapped her head lightly and said, "Don't be stingy." From beginning to end, Su Ling stood silently on the side, looking a bit gloomy, not as gloomy as she should be at this age. When Zhu Yao looked at him sideways, his gloomy aura dissipated in an instant, and he could still smile, looking innocent. Qi Lian looked at him with extreme displeasure, and she had always wanted to appear like a good person in front of Zhu Yao to clear her past grudges with him. She blinked her pitiful almond eyes and smiled, "Junior brother hasn't learned the imperial sword yet, why don't you join me?" Zhu Yao felt even more relieved, rubbed Qi Lian's head, and sighed, "After all, you're about to reach adulthood. I really understand a lot." "I don't." The rebellious voice of the young man came, and Zhu Yao looked up at him. Oh, she forgot about it all. One was an adult, and another was underage and immature. Su Ling pursed her lips and clenched her fist, with a calm expression and a hint of determination. "Master, I'm not with senior sister." "I want to be with senior sister," she said before Zhu Yao could speak. Qi Lian hugged her waist and cried, "Does junior brother dislike me? Why don't he want to be with me? Does he still remember the incident of me fighting with him? Zhu Yao has a headache for a while." What does this mean? It indicates that only one child can be raised. When she only had Qi Lian by her side before, she only felt that Qi Lian was obedient, sensible, and suitable for her own needs. But now with only one more person, I feel overwhelmed by trivial matters and can't bear it anymore. Zhu Yao looked at Su Ling and was about to say something, when she met his melancholic eyes and swallowed them again. Both are ancestors. Zhu Yao did not comfort Qi Lian as usual, but gave her a handkerchief and said, "Wipe away your tears, you're almost an adult. What's it like to cry like this?" Qi Lian stopped immediately and wiped the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. Zhu Yao looked at Su Ling and reached out to him, "Follow me as my teacher." Su Ling's eyes lit up and she took 2 steps forward, feeling a bit awkward as she reached out to Zhu Yao's hand. At the moment of feeling the warmth of the palm, the system's prompt sound rang again. D. Favorability +5, currently favorability is 0.2. The system was pleased and added, "Host, keep working hard." Zhu Yao rolled her eyes to herself and said to the system, "Fix your bug first before you talk to me." System. End of this chapter. Chapter 8008. Collecting apprentices is for fun. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8008. Collecting apprentices is for fun. Zhu Yao sacrificed her own destiny sword and frost descended, leaping up. Su Ling pinched her sleeve and stood behind her. She smiled and said, "If you're afraid of falling, hold on to me tightly, but don't tear my clothes apart again." She couldn't see any expression on Su Ling's face behind her. After a few breaths, she stopped her hands from her waist and her body carefully leaned closer to her. Qi Lian snorted and said, "Junior brother, although you are young, you have also developed wisdom. You should know that men and women are not compatible." The hand holding her waist paused for a moment, and the force relaxed a bit, but it didn't take it away. Zhu Yao gave her a stern glance and said, "Qi Lian, don't act recklessly." Qi Lian didn't know what emotions were causing him, so he took a step and left with his sword. Zhu Yao had no choice but to follow along. "Qi Lian has been pampered by me in recent years, so there's no need to pay attention." Su Ling remained silent, and her hand around her waist tightened a bit. Through the thin clothes, she could sense the softness brought by Su Ling's cheek pressing against her back. His breathing has increased a bit. Zhu Yao was a bit puzzled. "Do I have any scent on me?" A faint woody fragrance. Zhu Yao couldn't help but laugh and cry. "The sandalwood I ordered in my room. This fragrance does have a calming effect. If you like this taste, I will send some to you later." Su Ling remained silent. Zhu Yao set off nearly 10 days early, and the time was not rushed. As night approached, she settled in a nearby city. Climbing onto the second floor of the local, drunken immortal tower, and taking a seat, Zhu Yao casually ordered a few dishes and asked Qi Lian what to add. Qi Lian shook her head and looked at Zhu Yao eagerly. "I won't eat." "Did master forget?" "I can't eat these days." Zhu Yao paused. She really forgot that Qi Lian needed to cross the tribulation on her day of adulthood, and there must be no impurities in her belly. She smiled lightly and said, "I haven't had a good memory lately." Qi Lian pouted and said, "Master, what you said is not interesting. You have a bad memory, but you remember that junior brother Su has a light taste and orders are light." Zhu Yao's eyebrows furrowed slightly. She didn't pay attention to what flavor Su Ling liked, but only remembered that he had been injured a while ago and was a mortal body. She must use the method of mortal cultivation to care for him. "You're already big and big, what do you always argue with him about?" Qi Lian frowned and said, "I'm just about to reach adulthood, and I'm not leaving the Qingshu sect. Master has grown tired of me so quickly. I see new people laughing, not old people crying." Zhu Yao was left in tears and laughter by what she said. It seems like being a teacher is full of both new and old things. Qi Lian looked at her with a hint of accusation. "Isn't it? Zhu Yao. Do you have it?" She turned her head to look at Su Ling, who fell silent for a moment before nodding along. Zhu Yao clicked twice. When the food was served, Zhu Yao saw that Su Ling refused to move his chopsticks, so he had to take 2 bites before moving his chopsticks. She didn't have much appetite and chewed a piece of green melon slowly. "Have you heard about it? The Sun family kid at the end of the left street alley eloped with a brothel girl a few days ago. Yesterday, someone found his body in the outskirts of the city. There was no trauma, only a layer of skin wrapped in a skeleton frame, and there was no meat left. It was a frightening sight." Whispering came from the neighboring table, causing a burst of sighs. Zhu Yao perked up her ears and listened for a few words. Without any external injuries, wouldn't it be like being sucked by evil spirits to nourish one's cultivation? I heard that some evil spirits rely on sucking on others' flesh and blood essence to promote cultivation. Everyone at the table took a deep breath. Zhu Yao unconsciously tapped the edge of the table twice with her fingertips, and the words were quite accurate. It is not false to rely on sucking on the flesh and blood essence of humans to promote cultivation, but it is not evil, but a forbidden technique of the demon clan. This technique is too cunning and goes against the heavenly way, which is unacceptable to the world. Therefore, it has been lost for many years, and there is no record of it in thousands of books. Only a few sentences mention it, saying that this technique is cunning and goes against the heavenly ethics. That brothel woman is not necessarily a villain, is she? She specifically seduces people to elope and takes advantage of no one to suck on men's essence. Speaking of which, the Sun family is not the first to go missing. You forget, there are still several ahead, but the bodies have not been found. They may have been eaten by wild wolves, tigers, and leopards. I remember this. My cousin is a constable in the yamen, and the missing people all have one thing in common. What do you have in common? Speak quickly, speak less. The person cleared his throat and smiled. Those people have all been to brothels, and they all go missing on the 15th of each month. Qing Lu. Ha ha ha, Brother Lu, you've been wandering among the flowers all year round. You need to be more careful and not be targeted. Go, don't curse me. That table swept away the tense atmosphere just now, slapping shoulders and laughing back together. Zhu Yao blinked, and Qi Lian immediately knew what she was thinking. She smiled and said, Master, we're not in a hurry. Should we keep an eye on you? Slaying demons and eliminating demons is the responsibility of the Qingshu sect, and when encountering them, one cannot let them go. She took out a yellow talisman from her arms and said, there is a suspicion of the presence of the demon clan in Yuzhou. Could you please investigate quickly, senior brothers and sisters? With a casual flick, the yellow talisman flew away towards the outside. Zhu Yao asked, what day is it today? Qi Lian replied, today is the 15th day. On the day of Yin, absorb yang qi for great nourishment. That means someone is going missing tonight. Zhu Yao knocked on the edge of the table twice and said, the Qingshu sect cannot come for a while. Today, we will rest here. Qi Lian smiled and said, instead of waiting for death, it's better to seize the victory and pursue. Zhu Yao glanced at her suspiciously, exchanged glances for a moment, and looked at Su Ling, who was eating quietly, in unison. He was taken aback, put down his chopsticks, and looked at Zhu Yao, Master, I'm still young. Zhu Yao silently withdrew her gaze, she almost forgot. Demons are good at disguising themselves as brothel women and targeting men with unclear minds. Those people wander around the brothels all day and are mostly ignored at home. Even if they linger outside for a few days, no one may be at ease to avoid being discovered in the first place. So just now when Qi Lian talked about pursuing victory, she naturally thought of Su Ling. He is the only man among the three. But I forgot that Su Ling is only 16 years old this year. Qi Lian was afraid that the world would not be chaotic, so she smiled and said, you used to belong to the Su family in Yazhou. The Su family in Yazhou is a noble family, and even if you haven't been there, you should know the secrets behind it. It's up to you to lead the way, so it's not easy to expose them. She said as she looked at Zhu Yao, her eyebrows furrowing slightly, as if she was considering feasibility. She added a powerful medicine and said, Master, we still don't know the strength of that monster. We can't scare the snake with grass. If you and I use a deception to enter and get caught, then Uncle and the others will send someone, and they should be alert. This is indeed true. To cultivate and absorb the essence of others to promote one's cultivation, ordinary people need to practice for thousands of years, which is only a height they can reach in just a few short years. It's really not easy to scare the snake out of the grass, but she also knows that Su Ling is already powerless. If there is any mistake, he will definitely. Zhu Yao suddenly thought of something and asked the system, will you make the villain die? The system was suddenly startled and said, what do you want to do? Zhu Yao got the result from the systematic tone. Yes, who is Su Ling? He is the biggest villain in this book. In the end, he even killed the male and female leads, with a halo second only to the male and female leads. How could he be taken offline so early? Moreover, the task that comes with oneself is him. If he dies, this task will not exist, and there is no need for the system to exist. Zhu Yao chuckled softly, making her scalp tingle. Are you planning to send the villain to die? If he really dies, you won't be able to live either. Zhu Yao grinned and replied to the system, isn't taking apprentices just for fun. Besides, he gave birth to me, and he died and I fell. Isn't it just a direct form of sadistic love? End of this chapter. Chapter 9. 009 Obey Master's Arrangement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 10. 010 You are not allowed to call me Master. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10:10. You are not allowed to talk about my master. Chuanxue looked coldly and saw Zhu Yao Shanshan rushing over, stopping in her tracks. Zhu Yao let out a cold drink and said, "Frost is falling." The long sword pierced into the wood with a roar, unable to stop shaking. After a moment, it thrust towards the direction of Spring Snow. Spring Snow completely lost her charming posture in the brothel, flipped over to avoid it, and Frost fell in a circle in the air, returning to Zhu Yao's hands. "Who are you and why do you harm me?" Chuanxue asked coldly. Zhu Yao smiled and said, "I, Zhu Yao, the 4 elders of the lower Qingshu sect, have been practicing justice for the heavens. It is inevitable that I will harm your good deeds." Chuanxue sneered, "Who should I be? I turned out to be the most incompetent spendthrift of the Qingshu sect. I'm afraid your disciples are even stronger than you, right? If it weren't for Shaolinza passing the throne to you back then, what would have happened to you?" Zhu Yao was also surprised. "Is my reputation so bad outside?" Qi Lian hurriedly said, "Master, don't listen to her nonsense. This woman is just jealous of you." Zhu Yao looked at Qi Lian with satisfaction, knowing that it was her disciple who had been with her for 5 years. But it was obviously not the time to worry about this matter at the moment. Zhu Yao waved to Su Ling and said, "Su Ling, step back." Su Ling nodded and took 2 steps back. Upon seeing this, Chuanxue felt uneasy. Before she could react, she saw Zhu Yao pinching her hand technique, and a golden light appeared beneath her feet, forming a circular barrier that spun. She wanted to walk, only to realize that she couldn't move. After struggling twice, Chuanxue gritted her teeth and said, "You actually let a mortal serve as bait. The reputation of the Qingshu sect is well known outside, and now it seems that it's just that. What's the difference between you and our demon tribe, considering that mortal life is nothing?" Zhu Yao hooked Su Ling's neck as he walked over and smiled, saying, "Heaven and earth have a conscience. I didn't force him to do this, he did it voluntarily." She turned her head to look at Su Ling and said, "Su Ling, isn't it?" Su Ling looked at Zhu Yao, who was just a stone's throw away, and for a moment, she shook her mind and whispered, "Yes." Chuanxue sneered, "When did the Qingshu sect fall so low? Surprisingly, they would also accept ordinary people with no talent as disciples." Zhu Yao raised her eyebrows and said, "I'm willing, can you manage it?" Qi Lian said, "Master, let's not talk nonsense to her. Hurry up and take care of her." Chuanxue snorted coldly, "Do you have the ability to let go of me and let me see how the 4 elders of the Qingshu sect behave?" Zhu Yao puts a bag of steaming roasted chestnuts in sugar-coated heated sand into Su Ling's arms and looks at her in surprise. "Do you think I'm foolish and easy to deceive?" Chuanxue couldn't seem to hear the mockery in her tone. "You dare not, right?" Zhu Yao shook her head and said, "You give up. The method of provocation is useless to me." After she finished speaking, there was an extra hand in front of her. Su Ling's slender and fair hand was twisting a peeled chestnut. She smiled brightly, lowered her head and rubbed Su Ling's head. "You're so good." He pursed his lips, but his eyes shone brightly, clearly benefiting. After staring at the two for a while, Chuanxue suddenly burst into laughter and said, "It turns out you're just taking a mortal disciple to be raised as a dog, right? Why are you so lowly? Don't you feel unwilling? She's also a disciple of the Qingshu sect. She can bring rare treasures to your senior sister, but she calls you a pet and waves you around, even asking you to risk yourself. Is it worth it?" Zhu Yao smiled and asked, "Are you stirring up our master-disciple relationship?" Chuanxue was not afraid and smiled, "Isn't what I said true?" Zhu Yao glanced sideways at Su Ling, as if he hadn't heard what Chuanxue had just said. He lowered his head and peeled the chestnuts with extra seriousness, then took out a complete, round and shiny yellow chestnut and brought it to Zhu Yao. She couldn't help but take 2 more glances at Su Ling, unable to see what he was thinking in his heart. But since the system did not say that there was a change in favorability, it seems that he has no resistance to himself now. We've been getting along for several months now, isn't it something you can provoke with just 1 or 2 words? Zhu Yao shook her head and said, you'd better dispel the idea of your accomplices coming to save you earlier. Delaying time is so obvious, you really think I can't see anything? She stood tired, stretched her muscles and bones, and saw a stone table next to her. She stepped forward and sat down, and Qi Lianba stepped forward to pinch her shoulder. He sneered, your little tricks are not enough for my master to see. We have already set up a trap and will wait for your accomplices to come and catch them all. A hint of doubt flashed in Chuanshue's eyes, but then she smiled and said, Zhu Yao, why do you think you have such a big ability to trap all of us? Zhu Yao. Aren't you just an example? Chuanxue said coldly, they are much stronger than me. Just wait and see. Zhu Yao is not in a hurry, he really accompanies her to sit and wait. In no time, a gust of wind suddenly passed and a rough and crazy male voice came from Snow's sister. Upon hearing this, Chuanxue immediately responded, Senior brother. I'm here. A man in a red robe fell in front of the formation, and with his palm, he trapped Zhu Yao in the barrier of Chuanxue and shattered it. Chuanxue was saved and immediately pointed to Zhu Yao, Senior brother, this person is the 4th elder of the Qingshu sect. He often doesn't play cards according to common sense and even sets up a trap for heaven and earth. We need to kill her quickly. The man in the red robe was wearing a mask, revealing a pair of crimson eyes. He looked at Zhu Yao with a hint of exploration and said, the most useless elder of the Qingshu sect. Upon hearing this, Zhu Yao exploded and said, what are you saying? I'm suing you for defamation. The man sneered and said, is it comfortable to sit on the position of elder that Xiao Linze fought for you with all his life? It's only been over a decade, and you've forgotten everything. I don't know if he knows your current virtue in heaven. Will he regret saving you back then? Qi Lianlian hurriedly said, you're not allowed to talk about my master. When did I get you to interrupt when I was talking to her? You're afraid you don't know why he took you to the Qingshu sect. Qi Lian paused for a moment. Enough, is it interesting to say these things? Why provoke the relationship between our master and disciple? Zhu Yao said. I'm just happy to tell her that if it weren't for this shark's life being 3 parts like Xiao Linze, would you take people away from the East China Sea? Qi Lian's whole body shook and turned to look at Zhu Yao, with a hint of injury in her eyes. Master, is what he said true? Zhu Yao didn't know what to say for a moment. The man in the red robe saw the right moment and a cold light rushed towards him. Zhu Yao swung his sword to block it and stopped the 2 of them. Zhu Yao smiled and said, speaking of which, you 2 are mentioning Xiao Linze in front of me one by one. Isn't it true that both of you like him? It's a pity that even if he protects me, it's useless for you to be jealous. We both know each other and know each other, how could he not know my temperament? The proud son of heaven died because of you, but you are very proud, said Chuanxue coldly. Zhu Yao still wore a faint smile on her face, oh my, you know too much, I dare not keep you. She glanced sideways and said, Qi Lian, protect Su Ling. After speaking, she lifted her sword and headed straight for the 2 of them. The 2 of them gave a surprisingly unanimous sneer. Out of measure. End of this chapter.